Morning, everybody. Welcome to this month's RAG Global Community Safety Roundtable. I'm Jim Nixon, and I'm going to be hosting this roundtable today. Really thrilled to sort of see so many people sort of signing up to the roundtable today, because I think this is a really, really important subject that, I think lots of people talk about, and it's really good to get some real experience and some knowledge and improve our knowledge around what is the best way to approach dealing with young people that are affected by domestic abuse. Little bit of housekeeping before we start. We're going to be sort of working to about an hour for the session. You will get a free 1 hour's CPD as well from the session. So once we finish today's session, we will collate all the names and the email addresses of all the attendees, and then our admin team at RHE Global will send you all of the certificates out pretty quickly. I think you'll probably get them before Friday. So that will be done. So we always give that hour's free CPD. In a moment, I'm just going to reveal a poll just to sort of get things moving and just see what you think around sort of how we are, looking at the knowledge base and how we can approach this really important subject. And then once we've done the poll, I'm going to introduce our special guest, and then we'll start. As a lot of you that have already attended these sessions before, it's not kind of one of those interactive where we will kind of get you on stage and talk to you. It's very much about, can you populate the chat, use that chat facility as much as you can, get your questions in the chat throughout the session, and then what we'll do is at the end of the session, the last sort of 10 minutes or so, we'll go through that chat. We'll pick out some of the salient questions, but what I will always do is I will go through that chat, and I'll liaise with our special guest, and we'll always make sure we get back to the relevant individuals, and also post it on the RHE website as well. So, without further ado, what I'm going to do is I just want to kick this off. So, today we are going to be talking to Dr. Asha Patel. And Asha, in 2016, started a fantastic organisation called Innovating Minds. It's a community interest organisation, and they're very much about using all of the experience that they've got to work with young people and professionals around young people that are affected by domestic abuse. And we can get into that in a little bit more detail as soon as I bring Asha on. But to just kick things off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a poll. So you should see a poll in the very near future in the chat. So I'm just going to open that up now. And I'm going to just quickly get now with this particular poll. There were a couple of issues with me getting the whole answers on the screen, all the options. So forgive me for that, but I will just go through it. So what do you see as the biggest challenge in supporting children and young people affected by domestic abuse? So the options are going to be identifying signs of trauma early, lack of resources and specialist support services, building trust and engagement with affected young people, children, and ensuring a trauma-informed approach is embedded in practice. So that should also all be live now. You can access it via the chat. So please utilize. I can see it's already been sort of populated. At the moment, we've got lack of resources and support winning the day at 53%, and rising quite steadily. So keep that moving, and we'll see what the sort of final results are towards the end of the session. So without further ado, I am going to bring on our special guest, Dr. Asha Patel. As I said, Asha is the chief exec of Innovating Minds. She's very, very experienced, worked with an awful lot of professionals and young people. And I'm going to get her onto stage and introduce and get her to introduce herself to the audience. Asha, good morning.
Morning, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you. I know we've been talking for quite a few months now in preparation of this, so it's good for people in the in the actual event to understand that these things don't just get thrown together at the last minute. We spend quite a lot of time sort of talking, and you understanding where I'm coming from, I understand what you do, and it kind of works really, really well once we kind of do that prep. But Asha, over to you. Introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit around, uh, Innovating Minds, why you started this community interest company. So I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, so my background, so prior to Innovating Minds, I was a clinical psychologist working within forensic mental health services. So I've worked in prison services and also medium secure mental health services. And that was supporting adults, young people that had committed really serious offences. So typically high profile offences, murderers, sex offences. And my frustration was actually it was a little bit too late. A lot of the people that I'd worked and supported with had experienced difficulties in their childhood. They wasn't able to get the help and support that they needed, and then here we were later down the line, where there was in hospital and accessing lots of professional support. That actually the frustration was every time we tried to go through the rehabilitation process, look to step them down into less secure settings, support that community integration. I'd be sat in meetings talking about how bringing them back to medium secure services, and I just felt like we need to be doing something earlier because these are victims in their own right. And
Yeah.
how do we make systemic change within the community with across education, health, and social care? And how do I share my experience of knowledge of doing that in inpatient services and actually creating systemic change later on down the line?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point that you raised. As a lot of probably the audience probably know from my background, I have a policing background. I was a sergeant in West Midlands Police, and obviously dealt with a lot of young people during that time. And I didn't like sort of the situation for me was I didn't want to write young people off, and I could see very early doors, that um, things that had happened in their early lives, although I didn't want to excuse their behaviour and I wanted to address that behaviour. I became, and I sort of embedded this into my team, that we needed to look at the root causes of what was going on with that young person, and why. There's for me, there's always a reason why somebody behaves the way that they do. There's a root cause to it, and I take it that's kind of what motivated you.
Yeah, 100%. It was always looking past behaviour, because often that's the thing that we focus on and get fixated on. But behaviour is a form of communication. So, what is it that that young person's communicating? But most importantly, how are us as the adults reacting, responding, and the assumptions that we're making? Because that drives a lot of then the impact we have on the children, how we respond to children, the systems we set up for them, the services that they can access is based on those assumptions that we're making.
Yeah, it was quite interesting actually. Once when I was working in policing, I spoke to a couple of nursery nurses that were dealing obviously with very young kids, and it just came up in conversation one day, and they were saying to me, you know what? We can identify some of those young kids now at that age, at that very young age, that are probably going to be our issues in the future because of the things that we obviously are concerned about at their home addresses and potentially what they are experiencing. And that's quite it's really important that we're kind of in tune to that, but at the same time it's actually quite frightening, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the reality is it's getting more frightening because the statistics are going up, they're not coming down in terms of when we look at the number of children that are experiencing mental health difficulties, are experiencing trauma. Those numbers keep creeping, and actually, we think that they're a lot higher than what we're saying statistically is already taking place.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to sort of, take the focus off adults that are affected by domestic abuse because we know that it's such a big issue around the world. It's a big issue in the UK. I can remember as a response sergeant, covering response duties. the amount of incidents that we would go to that were domestic related in some shape or form was huge. And that was back in 2016 when I left, and like you say, the statistics are going up. So I don't want to take away that focus, but it does have a profound effect on children and young people when they are subjected to directly or indirectly domestic abuse incidents. Could you share some insights into sort of the short and long term effects of that kind of constant exposure?
Yeah, sure. So what we think at the moment, and what statistics are saying, is at least 1 in 5 children are living within a household of domestic abuse. And before, we used to talk about children witnessing domestic abuse. So a lot of the terminology was used around witnessing. And what we now know is actually children don't witness domestic abuse, they experience domestic abuse. So often what we can assume is that, well, the children may not be in the household, they might be upstairs in their bedroom, so they've not heard all of the commotions taking place. But what actually evidence base has shown us is that children are affected, and the ways that they're affected is whether it affects their mental health and well-being. It affects their sense of safety within their body. So there's a body response to this. It affects relationships. That's with their own family members. Socially, affects engagement with education. So often we can see them as non-attenders. They're school refusers. But actually, imagine this young person is actually maybe seeing themselves as a protective role for their safe parent. So whether it is mum or dad, that's their safe parent. Going to school and leaving them thinking that they're going to be harmed is going to be really anxiety provoking. It's going to be very difficult for them to sit in a lesson and engage whilst they're thinking, is my mum or dad safe at home?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the effects goes across their whole life. It doesn't just affect one domain. It affects even things around toileting, bedwetting, eating. So it's really important to think about it across every aspect of a child's life, that the effect it's going to have on them.
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it? And again, I suppose the knock-on effect to that is when they are experiencing that trauma, that will inevitably get displayed in certain poor behaviour at school and the way that they sometimes kind of deal with those situations that they're like you said, they're worried about one of the parents. That can then, have that sort of meltdown effect, I suppose, at school, can't it, in terms of their behaviour?
Yeah, so the way to see their behaviour is actually it's either life persevering, so that they're responding and they've been responding for so long to keep themselves safe. And that's really important to think about, is actually they're doing things or things are taking place to protect themselves. And we know that the safety survival brain will be constantly going into action because that's what the body's job is to do, is to keep them safe.
Yeah.
So the behaviours that are displayed that we're seeing as antisocial and problematic is actually protecting and serving a function for that young person. And often we see it as, well, it's disruptive, it's intentionally done, but actually what it is doing, it is serving a function for them and a need that we're not meeting. So they
Yeah.
have this unmet need that they're trying to get met.
I'd say my worry with that as well, and again, I saw this quite a lot in my time, both as a police officer and an ASB manager, was that inevitably, if that young person's behaviour comes, really bad for the school, the normal kind of end result is exclusion. And then for me, that then makes them even more vulnerable, because not only are they dealing with the domestic abuse situation at home, but now they're vulnerable and they're open to exploitation. And I know we're kind of opening up a whole new bag there, and it's probably not one for today, but I think it shows how this kind of opens up and sort of evolves when they're in that situation, when they're not getting the support and maybe their behaviour isn't understood. It's kind of that kind of where it goes next.
Absolutely. It's that escalation of kind of, and school, they're coming into school. So often we can think about engagement and think, well, oh, they're not engaging in school. They're coming out of lessons, they're walking out, they're on the school grounds, not doing anything. But the fact that they've actually come to school is engagement. It's a huge thing, but often we've got our own perceived ideas of what engagement looks like or what we want it as the adults to be.
Yeah,
But a young person that's going through this and experiencing the trauma that they have through the domestic abuse and still able to come into school, and they might not have the full uniform or correct uniform, or but whatever they've done, they've come and found a way to be there. And then us as the adults have deemed that they've not shown up in a right way. And then we go down the route of exclusion. And there's always a balancing act here, because it is about keeping everybody else safe as well. So we're not saying there's an excuse here.
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah,
and,
you're right.
and risk needs to be
Of
managed
course.
appropriately and effective, but at the same time, how do we make some systemic changes or even some flexibilities within policies and procedures to be able to support these children relationally instead of looking at punitive and consequence-based approaches?
Yeah, definitely. When you look at this, do you feel that there's a particular age group that are more vulnerable from sort of the research and the experience that you've had with dealing with this really serious issue? In terms of how does the impact manifest differently across different age groups?
Yeah, so often we think it's the older ones, the older children that are living in the household because they've been able to understand it, experience it, and hear it. But actually, research shows as well the effect on babies is absolutely massive. So we often think, well, there was baby, there was young, but when you look at the case studies and the research, it's actually the babies and the younger children that when you follow them through their childhood, that they later on go to develop more significant mental health difficulties or be more vulnerable to things around exploitation, mental health difficulties. And it does make sense because as a young baby, they're so dependent on the caregiver to be able to support them and meet their needs. So when that baby does cry, typically what happens is that the parent will engage with them, soothe them, respond to their needs, whether they're hungry, whether they need changing, whether they need soothing. And if a child's not had that, they then actually go without that ability to be able to know that they're going to be looked after. So their
Yeah,
body is going into that survival mode very early on. And children, what we see later on down the line is their emotions. So either they have to learn to suppress emotions, so it becomes a coping mechanism for them. And then when they do start to feel those emotions, they feel really intense and they don't know how to cope with them and manage them. So we see it as well, it's emotional dysregulation, the need to be able to self-regulate. But they've not had that opportunity of co-regulation because of what's been going on in the household. That safe parent hasn't been able to offer that, or they've done what they can given the situation that they're living in, but they haven't experienced that. So
yeah,
it's us in the community, in the school settings, in policing, social care. We can provide that for the children.
yeah. What would for you? What do you see a particular pattern in terms of you go into a lot of schools and you're talking to a lot of schools? What are you trying to achieve in terms of what innovating minds are there for really? What is it you're trying to achieve? We want to improve this. You've already said that the data's going up and up. We want to bring that down. We want to manage that risk better. I know it's a big question, but what are the main things that you are trying to change?
So for us, it's about upskilling the frontline practitioners that are with the children on a day-to-day basis. So Innovating's Mind mission is to reach 10,001 children every year that are affected by mental ill health and trauma. And the reason why it's 10,001 because there'll always be another one child. The best way we can do that, and the best way that's going to be scalable and sustainable, is to train the people that are with the children on a day-to-day basis, that are interacting with them. It's no good me as a psychologist having one session a week and then 6 sessions and that's it. It's actually training the people that are with them to be able to support the children, to understand the effects of trauma on the children, but also to be able to work with them in a trauma-informed approach. So children can access trauma-informed practitioners, a trauma-informed environment on a day-to-day basis. So it's not something that's done to them. It becomes a way of being. And that makes a huge difference because actually you might never know if a child is been affected by domestic abuse or some other form of trauma. But if we all take a trauma-informed approach and we all engage and a resource to be able to work directly with children in this way, then actually we're supporting probably a lot more people that needs to be supported than what we know about.
It's about that continued focus, isn't it? It's that joined up approach, like you say. If you're entering into, say, a counselling kind of situation, yes, you can offer so many sessions, but when everybody's kind of joining the dots and everybody's aware and everybody's working together, and there's that focus, it's like anything. If you keep that persistence and that focus on what you're trying to achieve, then you are going to start to see results over time, aren't you? I
Absolutely.
would think.
Yeah, and giving children a positive help seeking experience, if they can access this help by people that they already know and trust and in a space they feel safe in, they're more likely to go and seek help in the future, because that makes a massive difference as well in terms of help seeking behaviours. And then when people are engaging with them, so they do unfortunately become on our radars, whether it's ASB practitioners, the policing, youth justice, that there's not that negativity around, well, what you're here to do and you didn't help me the last time or failed the last time. So all that kind of helps if they were able to access early help and have a positive experience.
When we were chatting last week, we were talking about job titles, and we had a little bit of a discussion about that. And I know you wanted to bring that into the session today. Just expand on that in terms of you were saying it's so important that the right job titles are used when we're dealing with these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give a bit of context, we was talking about, so I was trying to get an understanding in terms of Jim's role and who will be on our webinar today. And he mentioned about ASB practitioners, and I was like, okay, is that the job title? And checking the understanding. So we're talking about antisocial behaviour practitioners. And what I was talking, reflecting to Jim is actually, if we've got job titles that are already focused on behaviour, and particularly saying it's antisocial behaviour, imagine you've got that as a job title, and now you're trying to engage with that young person or that family. They're going to see your job title, and already that's going to be a barrier. So before you've even started to engage and you've come with your good intentions, and maybe you're using a trauma-informed approach anyway in your work, but your job title is focused on behaviour. So we get the same within schools. So you have things like behaviour mentors. Um, it doesn't help in any way because it's showing that you're just interested in the behaviour and stopping the behaviour, whereas actually what you're interested in is focusing on supporting the child and that young person.
Yeah.
So really think about systemically that, yes, you might be trying to go this approach, but have a look at things around your job titles and how you talk about behaviour and that, because a child, they're already going to feel really shameful and humiliated about their behaviour. That they themselves know it's not okay, and they'll feel a lot of guilt. And then we're coming in with job titles like that. We're just adding onto that guilt, shame, and humiliation.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's because as I'm sure a lot of people on the call today will know, it's not that easy to change the job titles, because we're not just dealing with young people. But I've seen this, and the example I would give is sometimes I will say when we're dealing, say, with mediation, when you're say dealing with say neighbours that are in conflict, if you use the terminology mediation, immediately the red flag goes up because it's like, oh, I'm not going to talk to them, I'm not going to enter into mediation. And I think what I try and teach practitioners when they're training, I'm doing training with them, is just use a different type of terminology around how to explain it. So again, even though you may be an ASB officer or some kind of enforcement officer, it might just be you just carefully choose your words in terms of what you're there to do and what you and making it really clear, I suppose, that you're there to support as well as not just enforce.
Well, I'd challenge you a little bit on that, Jim, because our job title also sets us up for what we're doing as a
Yeah.
practitioner. So if I've got a job title of ASB, I'm focusing on antisocial behaviour, but we don't want the practitioner to be focusing on the behaviour. We want the practitioner to be focusing on the relationship with that young person. So we either do it or we don't, because it'll have a systemic effect.
Okay. Yeah.
And the same with adults. When we engage with adults, we're still taking the same approach. It's not just approach for children.
Yeah, yeah.
So why can we not change the job title? Because it'll apply across adults and children, and you'll probably see an effect in people, how people engage.
I think I saw a little bit of this in housing where, we had like ASB teams, but when we had problematic families, we were kind of then looking at roles where it was more aimed at support and it was more aimed at kind of tenancy sustainment. And I think I get what you're kind of coming at there. And I think they created new job titles and roles for those individuals. So they weren't sort of enforcement officers. They were support officers that were going in there to do everything they could to understand the family makeup and then offer that support. So I kind of get what you're saying, really. Yeah, I think what you say is a good point, and it might be that again, this is what we need to rethink moving forward: is how maybe some teams are the different elements of roles within a team, and it might be that actually, you have enforcement officers that are never going to go away. We're going to have those, but there may be arms to that particular team that just support, and that's where the job title could change potentially.
Absolutely. And then it'll shift people's mindset as well, those practitioners, that they're not focused on the antisocial behaviour and the problems or the family dynamics that are going on. They're actually supporting systemically. How can we support this family to overcome that trauma? And yeah, they don't want to. Nobody wakes up wanting to be angry or wanting to display behaviour that is challenging other people.
When we're looking at support, I think it moves really nicely onto the next kind of set of questions I wanted to ask. Really, when we're looking at young people and their needs to recover, what sort of things do we need to sort of be doing? I appreciate what we said about that focus, but when you're working with young people that are affected by this constant, um, domestic abuse, what are the main things for you that we need to be thinking about?
So there's a few things here. So there's obviously risk. Is it safe to work with this young person? And sometimes what we say is, oh, we can't work with the child because they're still living with the adult that harms, or they're still having contact with the perpetrating adult, which means then the child will probably never get support, because a child affected by domestic abuse, even if once the adult has left the household, they're still going through a process of being affected by domestic abuse, because whether it's court process, they might move in, they might have contact because it might be mum or dad, so there's contact arrangements in place. So how can you provide that support to that young person safely, so any support doesn't increase their risk of being harmed?
Yeah.
So what we say is kind of do that ongoing risk, and that risk will be fluid, but don't let it be a reason to not provide any support for that young person, because that means actually we're not helping them in any way, and it's just going to escalate.
Yeah, I like what you say there because again, I talk about this a lot, is that we do our risk assessments sometimes, but they're not constantly reviewed. And I think risk assessments, like you say, they've got to be constantly they're evolving. Our obviously objective is to bring those risks down as best as we can and keep them at that medium or low risk. But we've got to keep it under review, haven't we?
Now, the next thing is, and I'm just picking up on Andrew's comment in the chat where he says, okay, that there's, in an ideal world, this sounds great, but what about resource and time?
Yeah, sure.
When you're working from a trauma-informed approach, it's not about doing more, it's changing our approach so it becomes a way of being. And what we know about trauma-informed practice and how trauma is processed, it's not done cognitively. So asking children to relive and talk about their experience of trauma over and over again isn't going to be helpful to them. In fact, what we're doing is re-traumatizing them and putting their body through that re-traumatization by asking them to relive and tell their stories. So the best way, and what the most effective way from a neuroscience or relational based approach is actually supporting children from a body-based approach. And that starts with us as the people first. So if you're aware of how you're feeling, what your energy is like, if you're heightened emotionally, you've got lots going on, children are going to pick up on that and they're going to match that energy. And if you think about it, it's a bit like you've got colleagues, that you've got really anxious colleagues, and even when you start talking to them and engaging with them, you start to feel anxious. Likewise, you've got people in the morning that are like jazz hands on steroids because they're so happy in the morning. If you're not a happy, jolly person, they're not people you want to see in the morning. So it's us as a practitioner being able to regulate ourselves and being mindful of that. And then using body-based approaches with them to help their body and brain to feel safe and calm. Because what will be happening is we often think it's the brain. Tap into the brain. Let's change the way that they think and feel and behave, and that'll all have an impact. But actually, their body is bigger than their brain. So the body is constantly scanning for information, and it's been doing that because it's been so vigilant because they have been in an unsafe environment. So their body is constantly scanning for sensory information. So whether that's internal, external, looking around them. So they're constantly looking for cues of safety from us. So actually, if we can keep offering cues of safety to these children to help their brain, for messages to be sent back from their body up to the brain to say, actually, it's safe and calm, they'll be able to engage with you. And all three parts of the brain will be working together. So you might want to look up Dr. Dan Siegel's hand-brain model, which talks about the three parts of the brain all working together. I don't know if you want me to do a demonstration, if that'll be helpful. Maybe people put in the chat if they want to know more about that model, then I can bring that in as well.
Well, I was just going to bring that in actually, Asha, in terms of, obviously it's really important, coming back to, I think it was Dave's point and in the chat around resources. I think it's probably a pertinent point in the conversation saying, well, how can you as an organisation come in and help with those kind of resource issues and, improve and look at how we manage that risk moving forward?
Absolutely. So if you are, and this will apply for us as practitioners, so Dr. Van Siegel's hand-brain model, can you see that okay?
Yeah, sure,
so what you've got here is your bottom of your hand is the safety survival part of your brain. It's like the meerkat part of your brain. It's always constantly checking for danger. That's there to keep us safe. And then you've got the feelings memory, which is your thumb, and that stores information about things of how we felt. So imagine you got an ice cream, you dropped it, you felt really sad about it, you're really looking forward to your ice cream. The next time you come to get an ice cream, you're probably going to remember how you felt about dropping the ice cream before. And then you've got the thinking part of the brain. And that is where all the processing takes place. So things like perspective taking, so all the high executive functioning taking place. When you're feeling safe and calm, all three parts of the brain are working together. And that goes for us as adults as well. But what happens when you're feeling unsafe is the thinking brain gets flicked offline. So the safety survival brain kicks in. Thinking brain gets switched offline. So when you hear practitioners say, oh, they're not listening to me, they're not responding because there's a big incident, and us as the adults trying to reason with them and ask them loads of questions. Well, why did you do that? What are you going to do next time? How are you going to do that differently? Well, it's a bit of a waste of time because your thinking brain isn't engaged with the rest of the brain because your safety survival mode is kicked in.
So it's just not all linking up.
So it's not linking.
So you're not thinking rationally.
Absolutely. So then what happens is the safety survival part is attached to your body. So if you think about this part as your body, so the best way to calm everything and bring it back online is to work with the body, because the body can send messages back to the brain to say, actually, it's feeling safe and calm. And we do that. So things like breathing techniques, progressive muscle relaxation. You see children rocking a lot of the time, and adults. That rocking motion helps to feel that's the vagus nerve to feel safe and calm and regulated again. And how we interact with people. So our energy, our approach, our facial expressions, the language that we use, the tone that we use will instantly regulate that young person. That's not a resource that I'm asking you to bring in. That's you as the practitioner, and you're the biggest resource. And often we can forget the power of being with somebody. And you speak to a lot of the children, you look at all the research, it's that therapeutic relationship. It's that one person that they felt safe with, they felt calm with, was there for them, that was listening to them, that wasn't jumping into problem solving. And often what we can do is we say to these children, okay, when you're in this situation next time, what are you going to do? How are you going to do that differently? That's all great when that young person's feeling safe and calm because all three parts of the brain are working together.
Yeah.
But we're in the incident in the moment where they're feeling unsafe and they're in safety survival mode. That thinking part of the brain and all that work you've done, it's not switched online, so they can't access it. So once they've come down and they've kind of coming through that process, they're going to feel lots of emotions such as guilt, humiliation. Anger doesn't hang around on its own. They just don't feel anger. We often see anger, but it's a front door to lots of other emotions, as Jane Evans says. It's humiliation, it's guilt, it's sadness. It could be excitement, lots of feelings of excitement as well. So it's important that we think about that in context. So the resources, us as a practitioner, so you upskill those practitioners in these ways of working, understanding the effects of trauma and how they can relate to them, then the rest of the work, it'll be a part of way of being. It's not changing anything, it's just them working differently. So it's not extra time, extra resource, or saying do more on top of your job. Saying do things a little bit differently and you'll see the impact.
And how can innovating minds assist with that, Asha? What can you offer in terms of, can you offer sort of courses that will coming back to Dave's point, which I think is a really relevant point because we all know resources is a big issue, and I think you've explained that really well. What is it that you can actually offer to practitioners to be able to assist with that resource issue and to re-educate them in terms of better practices moving forward?
Yeah, so we offer trauma informed training, and a lot of other organisations do. What Innovating Mind does differently is trauma informed training across mixed with education, health, and social care professionals because you can learn a lot from each other.
Sure.
And then what we do is upskill you to be able to deliver resources with the children and young people. So we've got a program to support children with angry feelings, program to support children with anxiety, a program to support children affected by domestic abuse. And that's a 6-session program. It gives you all the worksheets, the manual, the video animations for you to then deliver that with children on a one-to-one or group basis. What that does is then give the practitioners the confidence to start implementing this trauma-informed approach, like the hand-brain model, into the rest of their work. So even if they're not delivering the Healing Together program directly with a young person, through that delivery and knowledge, they're actually able to then cascade that knowledge and information into the rest of their work with the people quite flexibly as well. So bringing it into conversations. And then for us, it's not just about training you and leaving you with resources, it's ongoing coaching. So whether it's group coaching, one-to-one coaching, to support the development of your practice, because as you get on this journey, you'll start to question things and start to question your practice, which is really good and what we encourage. And then you'll be like, well, how do I do this a little bit differently?
Yeah.
Or is this suitable? Or is it safe for me to do this? Because now you're reflecting on your own practice. I'll give you an example. We had one practitioner, and we talk about use of praise. Often we want to praise children and young people all the time. Like, great, you've managed to do this. And we go in as the adults with how excited we are. And we talked about the risk of praise and actually can it make children more at risk of exploitation and more vulnerable? Because if a child is always on wanting an adult's praise, then actually that's how children are groomed into things like county lines and criminal and
Yeah.
sexual exploitation. So what we actually say is hold back on your praise and ask the child, well, how do you feel about that first? And I remember this coaching session taking place and people were not sure about it and going back to their organisations and questioning it. And then they came back and said, actually, I was just about to praise this young person and go to school every day. And then I stopped myself and I asked that young person, how did you feel about it? And they said they was disappointed because they missed that they didn't get to school on time. So they was disappointed with themselves.
Right.
And she was like, I'd have missed that if I would have gone in. That's amazing. You've started school. You've gone in every day of the week. And what they worked on was getting that young person to school on time so they could feel great about going to school.
Yeah.
And
I really
ongoing
like that.
coaching is
Yeah,
what
I like
people
that.
need. It's not a one-off training session and off you go. You're going to just change
And I
things.
think there is that mistake that we make sometimes. I remember when I worked with young people in the police, you did kind of feel that, if you praise them and like if we had a group of antisocial behaviour, kids that were causing lots of problems, you would try and kind of work with them and praise them. And when I look back now, having you having said that, I can see actually that we didn't always get the response that we wanted, and that kind of fits into place now, really, really well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because it's us, it's our adults and what we're going with as opposed to what the child. So it has to be child led, and that means you stopping and thinking, okay, is this in the best interest of us as the adult or as the child? And often we're doing a lot of things because it's in adults' best interest and not the child's, and it's flipping
yeah.
it. And that takes some really strong senior leadership teams to go on that journey because it's quite a vulnerable place to be for you to reflect and think, oh, actually, and there's always going to be a young person or somebody you can think of where you could have thought, oh, if I did that differently, would it have made a difference?
Wow, that's really kind of food for thought. That is, it's just a completely different way of thinking, isn't it? But that's where you guys come in. That's where you can educate us. We're all learning every day. I would say every day is a school day, and it's really important that we continue to learn and look at how are we doing things and can it be done any differently. And there's always a better way sometimes to do things, or a different way that will then get better results. Actually, that's really, really insightful. I've really, really enjoyed that first session. What we're going to do now, everyone, is we're going to take a very quick break so you can just have a quick leg stretch, maybe grab a quick cuppa. It will only be a couple of minutes. So just look out for the 1 minute countdown. And then what I'll do is very quickly when we come back is, because I can see there's been a lot of activity in the chat, um, we'll do the survey results, the poll results, and then we'll bring Asha back on and we'll just go through a few questions. So we'll be back in literally 2 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Just a very quick break there, just give everyone a little bit of a leg stretch and just maybe grab a quick cuppa. Yeah, really interesting conversation. I'm so glad that we've managed to get Asha on today because I'm looking at the comments as well. There's some really positive feedback in the comments. So thank you for all that. And we'll touch on some of that in a moment. Just before I bring Asha back on, I'm just going to get the poll up and publish the results. So let's just get it on the screen. Okay, so what do you see as the biggest challenge in supporting children and young people affected by domestic abuse? And the big hitter really kind of picks up on Dave's point earlier, really, is the lack of resources and support, 50%. Um, Building trust and engagement, 19%. And then we've got a tie at identifying trauma early, 15%, and embedding trauma informed practice, also 15%. So lack of resources support is definitely our top kind of concern from our audience that have kindly attended and participated in that. So thank you for that. I'm just going to bring Asha back on, and we'll just have a little chat about that. So and then we'll go to questions. So I'm surprised. I'm pretty sure you're not that surprised by that result, really, Asha.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can all, it's like what we said before about resource, and it's really think about what does resource look like. And if you can build it internally, then actually it doesn't become that ongoing commitment because it becomes a part of induction, it becomes a part of your training, becomes a part of the organization's ethos. So when you're recruiting for people, this is how our service is, this is the approach that we take. So because with this approach, you're going to get people that don't align with it and it doesn't align with their values. That's okay as long as you're open to having those conversations to say, well, this is an approach that we're taking. We're not going through this punitive and consequence based approach and this power competition that's going on between us as the practitioners, as them as the children or the families. What we're doing is this is the way that we're going. So it also attracts people that get it and want to go on this journey with you. So
Yeah,
when we're thinking about resource, it's actually internal resource of upskilling the practitioners. It's not about additional services coming in and keep, because actually all those additional services that need commissioning, therefore the real specialist cases that you're working with the children and
sure.
the families that do need maybe specialist psychologist or some form of support from somebody. But if we can actually do a lot of the early intervention and prevention work and support those people, and we've seen it work where there have been step down, then that resourcing is only for you as a practitioners to be resourced. So really think about what do you mean by resourcing when everybody keeps coming, well, we don't have the resource. What does it really mean? And actually, long term, are you going to be benefit from that? Second thing, in terms of the results around trust and engagement, that comes up so often. Oh, what's the point? They're not going to engage in it. They don't engage in anything. Again, that's our perception of what we expect engagement to look like. And if we go in with this mentality or this expectation, well, it's a revolving door family, we've seen them all the time, it's been generations of family members that are coming through, already you're putting that out there that they're not going to engage. So guess what? They're not going to engage.
Sure.
So it's really, again, and so it's been able to think, okay, why am I thinking about that with that young person or this family? Because there's going to be families you really gel with and you like them and you go out your way and you keep trying different ways. There's going to be families that rub you up the wrong way. There's going to be people and children that bore you or irritate you. That's all okay because we're human, but it's being aware of that. And therefore, when we think about engagement, do you have access to things like clinical supervision, reflective practice to be able to notice these biases and these things that we're holding because we're human? And has somebody then able to think, okay, where's that coming from? Because there'll be transference and counter transference taking place whilst you're working with people. They're going to be transferring things onto us. That's a really powerful resource in itself. That if you can feel that and think, okay, they're transferring this onto me and that I've got to keep doing more. Why do I feel like as a practitioner I'm not doing enough and I'm letting them down? Is that something that family's transferring onto you and you're picking up, and therefore what is it that that family wants? So,
Yeah.
and that's where we get stuck in this cycle. Well, what's the point? They're not going to engage, they don't trust anybody. Why would a child affected by domestic abuse trust anybody? They've been let down and not supported by the people that should be there the most, their parents and carers, who's somebody to keep them safe. So letting somebody else in is going to be a safety survival response to hold back, because guess what? You're probably going to leave me, or you're going to reject me, or I'm going to do something that you're going to kick me out of school for. So I might as well do that beforehand anyway. That's me doing it first and protecting.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's a really good way of looking at it. So, thanks for addressing that, Asher. I think we sometimes, I think speaking for practitioners that are on this call today and other practitioners, as you know, it's a tough gig at the minute. It's a hard environment out there. But I do think I am a big believer that if we can look at different ways of working that makes us more efficient, and that's where innovative minds can help, then let's try it. You've got to give it a go and see where you go with it. And I'll always work on that success rate of one. For me, I'd like to think that over the years, if you can help one family, one young person, and work on that basis, obviously we want to help as many as possible. But boy, does that have a knock-on effect in that person's life if you can help that one young person, that one child. That's kind of my mindset, really, and I've always tried to adopt that. Let's have a look at some of the questions then that have been coming in. This one came in quite early actually. Steve said, "I think focusing on the factors that may have an influence on behaviour makes perfect sense, and should be the thing that all professionals keep in mind. Not writing someone off due to this. There is also learnt behaviour that we all see, but at an early age or when into adulthood, breaking this cycle is a challenge. I think we've kind of touched on a bit of that already today, but it is a massive challenge, isn't it? And like we said earlier, the earlier you can get into this, the better.
And it's thinking of what do we mean by learned behaviour. It's a safety survival behaviour. It might be, and this again, it's a language thing. Is it connection seeking behaviour? Is it help seeking behaviour? And therefore, that's their way of engaging and eliciting and letting us know that they need support, that there's an unmet need here. If we're seeing it as learned behaviour, well, they just keep doing it over and over, and we've got to break that cycle. It's unrealistic for a child or an adult to break that cycle if they still feel unsafe and their need is not being met.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, this one might be one for offline, but Paula said, "What would you do if the parent that is abusing that if the parent is abusing their child, parents are split up, and the child lives with the abusive parent?" Might be one for a bit more sort of work on that in terms of talking to Paula maybe directly. But any sort of initial comments?
Yeah, so there's obviously the safeguarding routes, but if you're already in that safeguarding process, and it might be sometimes often family courts might have contact, or there might be parental alienation taking place, then how do you keep that young person safe, and how do you support that young person? Still offering them that approach of how and giving them the tools and resources to support them to feel safe and calm. So when they're starting to notice their body's feeling unsafe, how can they learn about their body and brain and how it's working, so they don't start to think that there's something wrong with them, or that they're an angry child, or that they're a naughty child, or a bad person. So you can still use those strategies. And in the Healing Together program, there's nothing that talks about their experiences of abuse. It's very much around understanding how their body and brain work together, what happens when they're feeling safe, unsafe, what happens when they flip the lid. And then they can use those strategies regardless of where they are living. So there's obviously safeguarding and contextual things to think about, but you can still use that approach with that young person. In terms of risk assessment, as that young person starts to use their approach, their energy will start to shift and change. And that's where the perpetrator of abuse might pick up on that as well. So they might start to present as being more calmer, because they're actually starting to learn about their body and brain and what's going on and how it's feeling. So that could be where it might be a little bit unsafe for that young person, but again, in context of not knowing that child, it's very difficult to answer.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. Interesting one from Sharon, just coming back on the point that we just discussed earlier on around the job title. So Sharon says, "I'm a community protection officer, and I think that job title only has a positive connotation. Managers should think of changing job titles to be positive, because what you're saying, Asher, has picked on something really interesting and important. Language can change things positively or negatively." So that's quite an
Absolutely.
interesting comment, isn't it?
Yeah, and it'll affect the community, because if the community know that they are community protection officers and you're not antisocial behaviour practitioners, how community respond to these individuals will have an impact as well. So you're educating the community just through your job title. and
Yeah.
getting other people to think about it. Yes, it's a nuisance for them, but what else is going on for these people? So that empathy building is massively important.
Yeah, it's certainly got me thinking about that this morning, after our conversation on Friday and now what you've said today. It's really, really interesting to think about that. And, it is something. And again, we get into this kind of mindset. We're all ASB officers, we're all this, we're all that. And things can change and we can change titles. There's nothing difficult about, there's a bureaucracy that we need to overcome, but it's not insurmountable in my opinion. Really, really interesting stuff that's come out of this. Now, what before we leave, Asha, I just obviously want you to just let our audience know how people can reach out to you, really, so that they can find out more about Innovative Minds and potentially kind of get you on board to come into their places of work and work with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just pick up on Sharon's point that this has made her rethink her approach of working with
Yeah,
children and adults, and that's what this is about. Again, because through Sharon, how many children can we be reaching just through this
yeah. Thanks for that
webinar?
comment.
So
Thanks for picking up on that,
absolutely,
Asha. Really, really important. That I hope this session today has just certainly made me rethink the way that if I was a practitioner now, I certainly would want to be looking at what are we doing, how can we join it up, how can we bring in organisations like Innovating Minds to help us reshape how we're trying to achieve this. So I am really, really. Really enlightened like Sharon around this session today, and I'm glad we've put it on.
So you can get in touch with us through our website, www.innovatingminds.com. I'll post that in the chat as well. And on LinkedIn as well. So I hang around on LinkedIn, so Dr. Asha Patel. So if you want to see additional content and stuff, I regularly post on LinkedIn. And we've got pages for Healing Together and Innovating Minds. Clinical supervision as well is available remotely, which is really important because the risk of vicarious trauma, all of the work that we do will have an impact on us. It's really unrealistic to think that it doesn't. So
Yeah,
we need to process that trauma because otherwise it affects everything that we do, the way that we are. And if we are not well as practitioners, then we're letting the people there that we're there to serve.
yeah. Asha, I can't thank you enough for the hour that you've spent with us this morning. We've had some great interaction with the audience, albeit, obviously interactively via the chat. But, thank you to you. Thank you to the great audience today for your comments. Oh, Andrew's just put a comment in just before we finish. I know I'm old fashioned, however, preferred my role as generic housing officer with a small patch, which allowed me to build trust and good relationships with tenants, rather than the specialist teams we have not, an holistic approach to the tenancy with one point of contact rather than a tenant being passed around between officers. But again, you could be doing a generic role as a housing officer and receive some really great work from Innovative Minds in terms of your approach. So I think what Andrew raises there is actually quite good in
And
terms
it
of
goes back to the relationship,
yeah, it
Andrew's role,
does.
because he was able to foster relationships, hold those people. Whereas maybe at the moment you're having to signpost them off to loads of different people and you don't get to build that relationship based. And it's through relationships. That's the key to it all.
Yeah, definitely needs a big rethink, doesn't it? And I'm
Absolutely.
sure that your organisation can really help with that. So if you're interested in any of the offerings from Innovative Minds and Asha and her amazing team, please reach out to them. I think they'll really be able to help you and work with you. Um, Also, from a roundtable point of view, if you've got any subjects you want me to cover, let me know. Drop me a line, jnixon@rheglobal.com. If there's anything you want us to cover, let me know. I'll get in touch with the relevant people and we'll do these every couple of months or so. But a big thank you to Asha and to everybody for attending this morning. Been a great session. And we've finished bang on time as well, which is even better. So thank you, everybody, and we will catch you soon.